Do you think consumers are willing to pay more for sustainable packaging?
In cosmetics, I think consumers do not pay for the packaging.
All right, so what are the questions that every brand should be asking themselves today to become more sustainable? That's the conversation that we're going to get into. We're going to talk about regulatory. We're going to talk about the laws that regulate the brands across different countries, new materials, sustainability icons, the little icons that you print on the bottom of packaging that tells you what to do with it. All that stuff changes across countries. So we're going to discuss that today and everything else that you need to know about how sustainability is changing the packaging industry over the next few years. We're even going to reveal a few insider secrets to how the big brands use luxury codes to communicate their value through packaging. These are the tips that anybody can use that's starting a business today or even an existing brand. And it's going to allow you to communicate your value through your product packaging. Welcome to Packaging Unboxed. My name is Evelio Mattos. Today, we're going to be joined by regulatory expert with the skincare brand La Prairie in Switzerland. Before we jump into the show, this episode is brought to you by IDP Direct, a sustainable luxury packaging manufacturer. IDP Direct owns several factories around the world, producing packaging for some of the biggest names in fashion. So if you want to learn more, check out idpdirect.com. We're also brought to you by SpecRite.com. So if you're a brand looking to manage all your specifications for packaging in one place, SpecRite's going to be the answer. The question I always gets, why do I need that service? Well, we got to talk about this a little bit in this show. And it starts with just 3 little letters, EPR. That's why you're going to want this. Save money, save your brand, SpecRite.com. Check them out. We're also brought to you by Packdora.com, the only place that's going to allow you to create die lines, place your artwork, prep it for print, and actually create 3D renderings all in the same place to get client approvals for packaging. These guys are the Figma for packaging design. Check them out, Packdora.com. And last, if you need clips for your podcast or YouTube channel, check out clipsninja.com. They're the fastest way to turn full-length video into YouTube shorts to grow your channel. All right, let's get to the show and talk to Judith Fiedler about sustainability.
Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, at the moment, I'm responsible for the product development team at La Prairie, located in Switzerland, as I said, taking care of formulation, packaging, development, but also regulatory registration and safety.
Wow. Okay. So La Prairie, for anybody that is not familiar, what is La Prairie? What do they do?
It's a cosmetic brand in the luxury cosmetic market, so skincare mainly. It was formed in Montreux, so also in Switzerland, and now it's one of the most inspiring brands in the market in the skincare sector.
Packaging is super innovative and definitely something to look for if you're not familiar with that brand. So today we want to just cover a few things. We want to talk about sustainability. We want to talk about regulatory. We want to talk about packaging and where we are today and how we're moving into the future. Mm-hmm. So I'd love to kick off with this question is, how do you, Judith, how do you define sustainable packaging? What is sustainable packaging?
It's a very interesting question because it's not so easy to tackle from my point of view. For sure, we have the principles like 4R principles. At the same time, I think it's not always so easy to cope with. So you also have aspects like carbon footprint and emission impact from the packaging. So while considering recyclability, while considering circularity in the design, it also needs to be reduced in size. And also the material choice is very important, obviously. And then if you look into luxury skincare, a lot of package is needed still. It's overpacked. So to reduce that definitely is something to go ahead with from my point of view.
Yeah. And you mentioned the 4Rs. So what are the 4Rs? So
it's about reduce your packaging, try to reuse materials, have recyclable packaging, and have a recovery circle, actually. So about circularity in the end. Yes.
When you're talking about reducing and reusing, you also mentioned some luxury codes. How do luxury codes play into packaging and sustainability?
Today, I would say consumers are still very used to very heavy packagings, especially in the luxury sector. So you use a lot of weight in packaging. And also often you play with weights inside of the packaging construction. So it's not actually the material having the weight, but it's the construction, how you do that. And you include weights so that the consumer feels it has more value. for the future, I think there is a shift needed. So consumer have to understand that the product still has a lot of value, but it's not so much depending on the packaging itself. And for sure, you still have a choice of materials. So you can still play with heavier materials like glass, for example. But to add on weights, this will be nearly impossible seeing the European Green Deal, for example, because it means also that you're not fully recyclable.
So just so that I'm clear, when you're saying adding weights, so there are products out there where, let's say, if it's made out of paperboard, that they would add in other materials to increase that weight.
Yeah, for example, if you have a cap for a jar, often it could be very lightweighted, and to have a better feeling, or also to have the feeling that it's really in perfect relationship with the jar, often in the cap you use some weight which is glued in and which is within the construction, so that the consumer feels it has value in the end, and that the material is of value. That is how it's done still. I see now brands changing, so they start to use alternatives or not to have weight in the packaging anymore, and they really start activities in that direction. I think the consumer will need to adapt to that because it really feels different.
Yeah. No, it's a huge difference. And I think we see that in the alcohol sector as well. The more expensive a spirit, they tend to have a thicker bottom of glass. The idea was that if the alcohol is expensive and it has value, then the brand has money to buy a more expensive bottle. And a more expensive bottle means a heavier bottle because of shipping costs, all these other things. And when you see it on the shelf and you see that big, thick base, then as a consumer, you know that there's value in the liquid. And that didn't make sense. I understand it, but it doesn't make sense from the consumer side to have learned this over time, to be like, oh, there's more glass. It means it's better liquid, but you haven't even tasted the liquid. So it's kind of the same thing with cosmetics, right? I know if you pick up a beautiful compact and it's heavy, you're like, oh, this has value. But how do we change that? So I guess, like, how do we change that in the consumer's mind? Because now if we have the same pressed powder in a really lightweight product, it's going to feel cheap, I guess.
And that's the challenge I see for the cosmetic sector, especially in the luxury area, because it means you have to translate the value towards the product, not towards the packaging. And often packaging was used to be the unique selling point also. It was not necessarily the performance of the product. And that is something I think brands have to learn and have to translate for themselves, for their codes, for their brands, to define where to go. So what is the next level and how can I do that in a more sustainable way, following the relevant principles, following the regulations to come, and really have a point of difference also. So there will be a requirement from the European government to say, you're not allowed to have too much packaging. You're not allowed to have too big packaging. So this means in the end, if you have 50 ml, the difference between brands cannot be so big anymore. So how to differentiate on shelf? What is the design I can still apply to? And how can I still transfer also the value of the brand, of the product, and give indication to the consumer? I think brands have to start soon or now to really educate their users.
We're in 2023. I have to look at my calendar. We're in 2023 today. Green Deal goes to 2050. So if we're looking at 2050, have we been doing this properly? Have we gotten started soon enough?
So 2050, the goal is really to be climate neutral. And if you imagine now, you sit on your sofa 2050 and imagine you're now 2023. Have we done the right thing? I think we're quite late, to be honest. We have a responsibility. We're still 27 years not climate neutral. And we already see that we have challenges due to that situation. So when it comes to packaging, for sure, the cosmetic sector is rather a small sector in the full picture, let's say like this, still, we have impact, especially since a lot of products are overpacked. If you look into food, less products are overpacked because simply they are used day by day. So brands are already starting to have less packaging used, and also it's of cost benefits for the companies for sure. In luxury or in cosmetics, often still packaging is quite huge compared to the volume you transport, the product you protect in the end. So a lot of communication through the packaging. And for the European deal, I think the main topics are really recyclability. So how to design products in a recycling, so that you consider already how you can recycle. Then also propose circularity. So how to do circularity and what to ensure in terms of materials being used, construction, things like this, as well as size, volume, and material in the end. So there are a lot of topics to consider there. For cosmetics, the starting point will be around 10% of recycling grade in products to be used for plastics. That is maybe a small number if you compare with beverages where you have 100% to be compliant in is it like 2030 or something? So they have really to catch up quickly, because 100% is a lot. But this also means today a lot of cosmetic packaging is utilizing food grade materials and recycled PET, for example. So you will not have recycled PET from the beverage industry because their aim is like to have 100% recycling rate. Yeah. So that is something also to consider. So where is the recycling material coming from? And then if there is a requirement for recyclability, this also means that you need to have significant amounts of materials available. So materials like ABS, for example, or other materials are maybe less likely to be further used because you don't have recycling streams for that materials. And so you end up with PET, PE variants, and maybe some other materials where you have more materials available to recycle in an industrial way. And today, chemical recycling is not foreseen in this draft. Right. So if it's not happening, then you can only use mechanical recycling. For sure, you can clean up and you have to, but this brings also limitations with the packaging, because in cosmetics, for sure, safety is key. So migration is a topic as it is for food grades or food industry. It's the same in the end. So you have to ensure your consumer is safe. And recycled grades are very tricky to handle because you don't know what's inside of them, or you have to really test every batch to ensure that there are no harmful ingredients used in the packaging, which could then migrate to the product. And that is also how to do that. And I think technology is evolving. So you already see also that industry is working on like virgin layer, recycled layer, virgin layer, so that you have no contact with the cosmetic product. And on the other hand, also brands are concerned of the quality of the recycling grade because your color ranges will differ a lot. So you cannot now say you have one color, this is my company color, because if you have mechanical recycling, can be that the difference is quite large, actually.
And then for anybody listening, recycled material, the color can't be consistent because of why?
Because you have materials coming into the stream which are not white, which are not transparent, which are black, which are blue, which are pinkish and things like this. So they will have impact, and you don't even know what color was used. And that's maybe only the starting point. Over time, I think brands have to see how they can do packaging in more transparent grades or white grades so that you don't have this effect anymore. But this also means you're probably not allowed to color the plastic anymore. That could happen. It's not written in the draft. The design is still open. But it's something to consider also in the constructions.
I'm just looking at my desk here, and on my desk, I've got, I've got black plastic here. I've got some green plastic, some white, some purple. There's all these different colors. They're not all the same material, but if they were the same material and they'd go through the same recycling stream, now we're combining all of these colors, and what comes out is not going to be a white or a clear. It's typically like this grayish, brownish, right? And then when you combine it with a translucent or a white to then try to dye it your own color, your color shifts, right? And I think for cosmetics, color is obviously so important. And for skincare, color is so important. You want white, you want clear. You don't want this muddy color. So I hadn't heard of this recycled virgin layering. That sounds really interesting. It makes a lot of sense so that, one, you can control color, and two, you can also then reduce any kind of transfer or contact to the consumer. It's pretty innovative.
Yes, but it also shows the current limitations we have. So we are still in our world where we live in now. So we don't see ourselves in 2050, right? And that means also that for us, color is still very important. So it's, again, we have to explain to the consumer, maybe we have a color shift, or we find other ways how to decorate and to label, and not to focus too much on the packaging color, but maybe use the label for communication in that. And 10% is only the first step, so it's still possible to think in layers, right? Yeah. But if you enter into 30% or 50%, that's a different topic. So we only talk about the first step, maybe to comply with the regulation. Doesn't mean that you do everything for the environment. Actually, you do the minimum. Then it's not exceeding.
So then, when we get to 2050, we look back and think, "Oh, if we could have just gotten rid of the color, that could have helped us move a lot faster, right? If we could have just gotten rid of this, if we got rid of the idea that weight was important in luxury, we could have moved a lot faster." These are just luxury codes that are difficult to change. And I would assume that every brand is afraid to be the first one, because instantly you're going to be seen as not on the same level as the other brands that are heavier, right? And that's a scary place to be, I think, for a brand. Mm-hmm. What would you say is the most innovative sustainable packaging today that you're seeing?
Today, when we look into packaging, we talk much more about materials. So it's the possibility what to do in future with the packaging. So when you see Noriware, for example, using seaweed as a plastic film alternative, for sure it's only for dry material today, but there will be other companies working on alternative solutions. And not only fossil-based, but also plant-based, or like biotechnology grades, say like this. And I think that is also the industry moving into and looking into options in technology. And that's very important. When we look into brands and how they handle it, there is huge difference in the market. So if you look into natural cosmetics, for example, they already use glass mainly, for example, and then it's quite easy to recycle. They often have not so much printing on their jars. They don't use metallization, for example, so it's already quite good recyclable. Often they don't use weights in the caps, and they have maybe even monoplastic caps, so which is also already recyclable. For luxury brands, it's still a journey to go because there is so much combination in the market. If you look into constructions and a lot of cosmetic packagings, you combine a lot of materials because of aesthetics, because of usability. And if you look into the formats in the cosmetic markets, and that's maybe also the biggest challenge here, is you have so many formats. So you have pipettes, you have dispenser, you have jars, you have tubes, you have related caps. So what is the construction for that? Sometimes it's even combined with accessories, so that it's even less recyclable because you combine so many aspects in one packaging, and usability is so important. So now, how can you manage that to be recyclable in the end? So it's also maybe the consumer to really open packaging, to really sort out things and bring it back to the recycling station. But this means also the consumer will know how you construct your packaging. Today, they put it in the waste, in the bin, and it's gone. And worst case, in the bathroom, there is no collection of materials, right? And the bathroom is like, I put it there and done. And that's it. And so they will know exactly how you construct your packaging. And you see it already with the Triman in France, where people are advised where to put the good in. So is it something to collect with glass, or is it only plastic? Things like this. And this will be also coming for Europe, actually, so that there needs to be guidance for the consumer how to recycle the things.
In case anybody missed this, because I think this is a really big point in cosmetics and skincare, is that there's no separation in the bathroom, right? You're not taking your cosmetic products to your kitchen to dispose of. You have a trash can in your bathroom, but you don't have, do people really not have separation in the bathroom?
From my point of view, whenever I ask friends or something, what are you doing with your garbage in the bathroom? It's like, we put it in the bin. That's it. We don't separate. Maybe it's if you have a deo or something like this, when you have an alu can, some people bring it back. Yes. Or maybe, carton boards. Yes. But not much more than that, actually.
Right. Because you run out of the product in the bathroom and you move on with the next jar or however you're applying. You don't think, okay, I need to separate this. So that's a challenge I think I would say most people haven't considered, right? Is what happens in the bathroom. Then I think the other challenge is obviously the luxury codes we discussed, the combination of materials, and then educating the consumer. How do you educate them to take these components apart? And then I think the one that I do want to ask you about is like size. Right. A lot of times cosmetic products are small. And are they too small to be recycled?
And too small is not existing if you have the right material. So everything what you have in material, and you can identify the material, and you have bin where it's sorted, then I think you can bring it back and you can recycle as a consumer. And in terms of products, what is for me bigger challenge then is if you have a pen like with 2.5 grams of powder, for example, for an eyeshadow. So, and you have a package which is, it's huge in comparison. So is that something really which is acceptable? And I have seen a lot of brands now moving into reusable concepts. And I think that's the right way to do, especially in makeup, because you have only the small little pen, and then you can put it into maybe a bigger size container and reuse this container. Still, the container also needs to be recyclable. So that is also then the next challenge. For sure, a lot of brands are already moving into this. I think not all of them consider yet that also the refillable container needs to be recyclable at some point of time. And what is really disappointing with this, I have an example on that. I use them. I don't will mention the brand, but I use eyeshadow. And when they moved into this refillable concept, which I really like, the old formats are not fitting. So I still have some outer packaging available. I could buy the inside, but it's not fitting. It's simply not fitting. Sure. And that's a bit, then you have to buy the outer case in addition. And I think that's not what you would like to do as a consumer.
Right. Because now you have to purchase another item, which is just one more component. Right? You want to just be able to use the existing component that you have.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I don't know. Sustainability is like a big topic right now. You also mentioned, brands looking in terms of innovation to like seaweed material, seaweeds into plastic. I know this was like a big topic on my LinkedIn last week. And I think the question was simply, there's a brand out there that used a seaweed based plastic, and they had a claim on there that said 0% plastic. The reason they put 0% plastic is that because they feel, and a lot of people agreed, that consumers understand the word plastic means petroleum-based plastic. And because there's no petroleum in there and it was all using seaweed, then it technically wasn't plastic. But it is. So from a consumer education standpoint, that is completely confusing, right? So how do we bridge that gap? How do we educate the consumer on the sustainable changes that we're making without diving into marketing gimmicks, right? Where we make sustainability a gimmick.
And it's a very interesting example because I believe consumers would like to do the right thing, but they're not educated in that way. So how can they do that? And it's important that brands are honest about what they communicate. For me, seaweed definitely is a better alternative, but it also needs to be recyclable in the end. Otherwise, or biodegradable. In this case, it's something to consider. So I think we also miss a definition here, which is helping the consumer to understand what they're buying. Because plastic is very broad, and for sure we have a chemical structure behind we're talking of, but it lacks somehow a definition. Because also when you talk about bioplastic, it's not so clear. For example, it can be based on naturals, and on the other hand, it's maybe biodegradable. It doesn't mean that it's the same, right? And it can still not be recyclable in the end.
Sure.
If you think about PLA or something like this. So I think definitions are needed to really guide the consumer, or explanations. What is it in detail? Is it no plastic? Probably it's not no plastic, but for the consumer, it's much easier to understand the concept. Very hard question, actually.
No, it's a challenging question, even though with the existing communication that's happening on packaging, consumers aren't reading that either. So it's like, it can't just be dependent on the packaging to educate the consumer. It has to be a broader message. It can't just be what's on the Trimon logo. It has to be a bigger marketing effort. I think not just dependent on the brand. I think just from an overall, whether that's coming from the government or different associations to help educate consumers, because every brand is going to try to do it a little bit differently. That's going to be a little bit confusing. So how do we just synthesize everything into one? What
I think the EU is very concerned about is about the communication in particular, because you also see that they're acting against greenwashing. So every claim needs to be justified. Every claim, you have to have data on hand, and it cannot be a broad claim. It needs to be very specific. And that is something I think this will change a lot in the market, at least in Europe. And it will also help the consumer understand better. But definitely, I agree, governments or associations or also NGOs have really to help in educating and guiding the consumer also a bit.
Do you think consumers are willing to pay more for sustainable packaging? As we educate them, as we tell them that these materials are better for the environment, for this, and this reason, are they then willing to pay more for this product in cosmetics?
In cosmetics, I think consumers do not pay for the packaging. That's my personal opinion. They pay the finished product, and they would like to have the perfect product. In terms of the product itself, it needs to perform, it needs to help you in maintaining your skin conditions, for example, or to look better, or whatever the aim is. At the same time, the industry is using packaging to differentiate on the market, on the shelf.
Sure.
And if brands reducing materials, I think it will be for them hard to explain why it's not cheaper in the end. So that
Right.
is something. And especially when you look into luxury brands, because you still use a lot of materials in the packaging. And for sure, people are willing to pay a bit more if they receive more value. So the question is how to translate that. If you really invest, for example, in innovative packaging ways that really make a difference and that help the environment, I think people will pay more. But this is also then really to be authentic, to be honest on that. What is the effort behind? And not only reducing materials and things like this, but also investing in alternatives.
Yeah, I think that's the challenge. Right? I think immediately as a consumer, it's like, well, if this is lighter, why isn't it cheaper? Right. But yeah, it becomes then the materials, like what new innovative materials are there, what kind of technology is required to get there. And, typically with when we look at our phones and all the other technology that happens, as soon as like something new comes out, the cost is expensive because you're paying for all the research, all the development. So it's understandable that if we have a new material, that there's going to be a cost there. Just how do we communicate that as a luxury product? So I think that that's really important as well. Like, I 100% agree with you there. But you're also involved in regulatory. And at the moment, I think the biggest question that I'm getting as a designer is, brands are saying, okay, well, our product is global. What kind of markings do we need? Where they're asking because they're not sure. Because in Europe, every country, not even just Europe, like just globally, every country has their own markings. So from a regulatory standpoint, are you seeing this challenge as well?
Definitely. So you have, for example, in Korea, you have markings, you have in France markings, then you have in UK, for example, you have to pay taxes for plastics, and in Spain, it's kind of the same. In Italy, you have different markings. So at least for Europe, hopefully there will be a common ground soon. For other countries, it will not. And it is due to the fact that you don't have the same sorting systems in every country. So the sorting system is very different in the countries. That will be a challenge, and it will remain a challenge. I think if you want to be agile on that, it's maybe over labeling to issue and to do, and really to assess then in the country what is needed. And if you have really big markets, really make it compliant for that market. So combine maybe US and Europe together, or maybe other countries. It depends on also a bit of the recycling scheme. But definitely, I think a lot of countries are moving into this. And when you look into China, for example, they started really with a scheme how to accept packaging. So you have, for example, maximum 4 layers, and you have a calculation method depending on the volume you have in your product. So you're not allowed in food and cosmetics to exceed that size.
Sure.
And that was a measure because they had the feeling they have too much packaging. As soon as China decides to move into recycling streams, I think that will move fast, actually. And brands have to be agile then on that one as well. And I think for every brand, it's a decision which country to follow. What is your lead country and what is maybe your heritage also? And then to see how you can adapt in other countries. It doesn't mean that you have to change your design, because you also would like to have consistency. And you would like to have the same product experience in the countries. But still, I think labeling potentially is something where you have to see how you can arrange that per country.
Yeah, I know at the moment I have a few brands that have rest of world packaging and Korea packaging, right? Because they have specific regulations that don't allow the rest of world packaging to enter. And the Korea version is so much more expensive that the brand can't afford it for rest of world. and these things happen, and it's not like there's one central place to notify the brands of, okay, this is what's happening in this country, this is what's happening in this one. This icon's no longer required. This one's required. This change is required. It's so complicated. It's so difficult to navigate as a designer and as a brand. How do you stay informed of what the next regulation is?
For sure, you have, for Europe, you have ECHA, you have the Commission to inform. That's quite good. And then in the countries, you have your own organization, and they have to help you in this to navigate, because you cannot be up to date with every regulation in every country. And you're handling cosmetics, maybe you have more than 60 countries to handle. So that's a lot. What you can always use are also service providers to help you in that. And there are some good ones out there. So to really advise you and to help you in that. And that's really useful, because you don't need to invest your time in research. You have already the overview. You see what's ongoing. And that's very helpful in that. And also, you have your association, cosmetic associations, and they help you with this. But in most cases, they say packaging is not their concern. So it's, they deal with all the other stuff, but packaging is like, it's out of scope. So see where you end up and do whatever you want, actually. And it's in the US, I think it's even worse, because you have all the states, and they also decide for themselves. So you have Washington, you have New York, you have California. And that to really keep up to date, you also need someone to help you in that, definitely.
You would think it's only 50 states that you have to worry about. But in the US, it's every municipality within the state has their own laws and regulations. So, like, for example, in New York, like New York City, they don't have a requirement for 40% PCW in items. But if you go up north in New York, I think Albany, one section of New York, they have a requirement for 40% PCW. And then if you go further south in New York, like there's another area that has this requirement. And I think they have like a 30% PCW. So like every single state it is so confusing that you just find the one area in a state that has the most complex requirements, and then you just use that for the entire country, because you're like, we can't try to mix and match for the US. We just find the hardest things in every single state and then combine that, and that's the regulation. And that's not easy either, and that's not fair to the brands or to the consumers. Is EPR impacting cosmetics? Is it impacting your brand?
Definitely. It's also, in Germany already started, or it will be a requirement, and you have to really showcase what you do with your supply chain, how you really handle risk in your supply chain, and really have also an audit performed. And there will be a law coming for Europe as well, so which is then even extended to the one for Germany. So Germany, I think, is 2 tiers, and then it's 3 tiers. And in packaging, it means also you have really to handle your raw materials in the end. And if you consider raw materials, so I mean, it's plastic, but on the other hand, also the formula, a lot of things are coming from China, from Asia, and really brands are forced to really audit the suppliers, or at least have understanding what they're doing. How do they handle that? And for example, also what you see is deforestation is a topic as well. So what do you do about? And there's even a law out there to follow. So which is from the European government as well, released, I think, by this year. And it's something also to keep in mind. So biodiversity, things like this, and alternatives to mineral oil is not so easy if you consider like palm oil or other things. So how do you handle deforestation, for example, with these items? And that's for sure not the brand itself, the supplier to prove you, but you as a brand have to check, and you have to say, okay, do I trust this? And also to really do a risk assessment on that. I think it's in terms of bureaucracy is quite big, and you need also systems for that. And I have seen some service providers, and they're able to give you a digital passport, let's say it like this, so that you really know what's happening and you have the stream before your product. So in polymers, for example, where are they coming from? Is it a big player like BASF? Probably then it's okay. Yeah, but if you use other players, maybe it's not so good, or other things as well. Or also, if you look into the supply chain, in the end, if you have a requirement of 10 or 30% recycling content, you also have to prove that. So you need traceability. And it's not that you have to trust your supplier, sure, but you also have to ensure that you have it in each packaging and in each item. It's not like a calculation scheme. So it's not, I have in one packaging 50% and the other I have maybe 0. That's not working. So it's every package. And to really prove that is also a requirement. And that's also part of the EPR in the end, because you have to show what you're doing. And this digital passport, I think, are very smart to be used for that as well.
I'm amazed at how difficult everything is getting, right? So if you want to launch a product today, if you're a startup and you want to launch a product and you need packaging, there are so many regulations. There are so many material challenges, the supply chain challenges. Like there's so much that it can become overwhelming, but it's definitely not something that you should have it be an obstacle that you can't overcome. I mean, brands are overcoming this, startups are overcoming this. So definitely, jump in, look at packaging. There's so much information out there. But yeah, in terms of the packaging, if you're looking to launch a product, it can be a little scary and there's so much information that you don't have. So I think working with a good supplier is important. Looking at some of these companies that can support you. So do you mind naming some of these companies that people could reach out to?
You mean in terms of advisory, or in terms of...
in terms of advisory, like you mentioned, some of these companies that can provide the passport.
Yeah, so the passport, I think I would need to circularize, I think it's the name. I would need to check that again. And then there are companies out there like Interzero, for example. They provide also such services. And I think they're very good in that as well. There are consultants out there, quite a lot actually, helping in that. And for the supply chain, I think it's very important to have really also a good ERP system. And they're also changing and helping you in that. And for me also, it's good to discuss in associations and really to exchange with your peers and see how they tackle that. And also, especially in startups, I think what's the good side on that, they're small. So they're a bit hidden, and it's not a big brand yet. And I think most of the startups are really aiming to do the good thing. So they already have a sustainable mindset. So for them, it's maybe that the sustainable choice is no question, and they don't have the challenge of transforming their brand. They can start a new brand, and that's a good thing in this case. But it's also, I think, big brands have really to think of what they do, because these small brands can have advantages, a lot of advantages actually. They have the freedom of choice in the end, and they can really decide to move to the good things. And their communication is maybe also easier to handle, because they can really focus on the good things, and they don't need to consider the past, because they really start with a white page and they don't have history behind. And that's something I feel it's an advantage for them. And to bring out a brand and to really handle it, I think it's important to be very focused. So focused on the countries you're dealing with, focused on the customer, and also you start small and then you do as good as you can. And for sure, advisory is good. And if you have, for example, in Europe, a responsible person, they should help you. Or a safety officer also in cosmetics, because they all are responsible in the end, and they should know also regulation. And, if you produce cosmetics, you also have the third party manufacturer. You will not have your own manufacturing. So you have someone who's a professional in the area. So they can help you as well. So you work rather with a network, in my opinion, to really handle the challenges and to find smart solutions.
Judith, I appreciate all the information you provided. I think there's so much here, from just how to be more sustainable, what to look at, looking at the future, kind of looking back. Are we doing enough? What are the little changes that you can make? Just educating yourself about regulatory, staying aware of your suppliers and, audits. And there's so much stuff that's happening, and how to educate consumers. Like, this is like the big conversation. These are the big conversations that are happening today, every single day, about packaging. And that's just like one component. Packaging is one component. It's not the product. So I can't even imagine how much more complex the conversation gets around product, especially on skincare, anything that's going on your body. But I do appreciate you being on here. And if anybody wants to learn more about sustainability and skincare and how to become more sustainable, is it okay if they find you and reach out to you on LinkedIn?
Absolutely. We'd love to discuss and see what options are out there. Also, always keen to learn new things. Definitely.
Yeah, and I think that's what's important today. Is I think in the old days, like I'm here. This is my job. I don't want to share. I don't want to learn. I don't want to like we were always afraid of sharing too much. I think today it's really about, we're not going to overcome this challenge unless we work together. If one brand has an amazing solution for recovery or recycling a new material, I think it's important that we start sharing so that we can move forward and hopefully get closer to these goals before 2050.